Let's jump into the first story. Southwest Airlines. From CNBC, Southwest drops plan to put unvaccinated staff on unpaid leave starting in December. Southwest scrapped a plan to put their unvaccinated workers with pending exemptions on unpaid leave after the December 8th deadline. Both American and Southwest require their new hire employees to show proof of COVID-19 vaccination before their first day. Large airlines are federal contractors and subject to a Biden administration order that requires their employees to be vaccinated or receive an exemption for medical or religious reasons. Now, I can respect the exemptions for medical and religious reasons. The problem is a lot of these companies are just outright denying them no matter what.
But this is a different case here because there's reports of Southwest executives literally going around the company asking people to please get the exemption paperwork. Please fill it out either for medical or religious purposes. So there's been an effort that people are reporting that they want them to get these exemptions. But this is a huge announcement. This is big. I mean, they're pretty much announcing that they're not going to be going along with this. Tim, you disagree here, but they're not going to fire employees, or in other words, put them on unpaid leave if they don't get vaccinated. They're not going to do that. That's a huge step to me that has been demonstrated through the Freedom Flu, through all the protests, through all the demonstrations, and through all the massive disruptions that we saw a couple days ago.
The people opposing the mandates are gaining ground. So this is a battle being won, but the war is still very much on.
Of course, 100%.
And here's what you got to understand. When they say new hires are still under the vax mandate, they're basically going to appease those who currently work. They're saying, well, doesn't affect me anymore, so I'm good.
Yeah.
And then new employees will have to be mandated. So what happens in 10, 20 years? The vax mandate stands.
We'll see how long the vax mandates are going to be implemented. I definitely agree with you. A lot of people think they're going to be temporary as long as COVID's going to be around. But as me and you know, and a lot of other people know, this is a long game. It's not going to be ending anytime soon. It benefits too many people. It benefits too many billionaires for it to stop. But this is still a major victory because the workers united here came together and said, hey, we don't like this policy. We don't want it. No. Go ahead.
I mean, there were some protests.
Yeah.
But we basically just saw people disorganized being like, nah.
Exactly.
That was scarier to this company.
Yeah.
Southwest is like, we're going to do this mandate. Oh, Biden's making us do it. And then a bunch of employees just called in sick.
Well, they knew
they didn't organize it.
They knew forcing this would be worse for them than not forcing it. So this realization, that's the big story to me. And that's why I led with it. That's why I've been talking about it all day, because this is huge. And there's going to be reverberations of this all over the place because now people know that their voice actually matters when they come together and they speak up together.
As long as they don't back down.
Exactly. And
because I genuinely think most people, the smartest thing they could do was, only new hires have to be vaccinated. Because then people who are already hired are going to be like, I'm good.
Yeah. Later down the line, that's going to have its effects.
It's doing it right now.
Exactly.
Right. So the vaccine mandate's there. This is an attempt to redirect. But it's probably still going to happen. It's probably still going to happen. And I'll tell you, I really don't think that the vaccines are the goal of the mandate, as you know, people who listen probably have heard me say a million times. Because if you look at the Chicago police, they're like, if you try and retire right now instead of getting vaccinated, we will take your benefits. We will go after your benefits. So very clearly, they're just trying to force people. You know, it's about the mandate, not about the vaccine part of it.
Also, it's also important in that specific case that a judge actually put a restraining order on the Chicago police union chief that's barring him from talking about the vaccine publicly. So this is a major fight that's happening between the police union, the mayor of Chicago, and this is not just in Chicago. There was also police and firefighters today in Seattle that decided that they were going to feed the homeless because they were fired from their public service jobs. Wow. And they came out, went on the steps of City Hall, took off their boots, left them there at City Hall. So there's been a lot of different demonstrations. There's been a lot of big protests in California. A lot of people took their kids out of school today because the kids are mandated to be vaccinated, and they took them to a protest. And there was protests all over California saying, no, we're not going along with these mandates.
Here's what I think is interesting about Southwest is that initially they denied there was any kind of sick out, right?
Right.
Not happening. Then all of a sudden the CEO comes out and says, we didn't want to do a mandate. Biden made us do it. And it's kind of like, why are you bringing up mandates? I thought the narrative was that there was no, that there was no protest or anything about this. So they're clearly trying to now blame, Joe Biden. But I'm wondering, Michael, what you think about, do you think Trump would have done something similar? Is this an issue of progressives enacting policies that are damaging to business and first responders?
I mean, at this point, honestly, what freaks me out is that we've had such a morale hit for the police in the United States over the last year and a half, ever since the George Floyd protests. We've lost, a lot of these police forces are understaffed right now. One of the things that I was so surprised to find was that the evidence of the importance of police, because I come from the left, and so I've always been somewhat skeptical of the police as part of the criminal justice establishment, but the evidence that police prevent homicides is just really strong, and the relationship between cops and potential killers, just interacting with them every day in the neighborhood, very strong evidence that works. And so after 2015, after the Ferguson protests, there was a pretty sharp increase in homicides. One of the police chief in Ferguson said, we're calling this the Ferguson effect because we think that both the cops are pulling back from their policing and the criminals are more emboldened. A lot of people on the left dismissed that, but we saw it again after the George Floyd protests last year. So clearly anything that that would basically dampen the morale of police right now, I think would contribute to increasing crime.
I mean, it's just at the federal level, federal contractors, federal employees, right? So I don't know, is it just a direct correlation between this is affecting the morale of the officers, or is this just failed policy?
I mean, I'm on the fence on this one. I mean, I'm vaccinated. I think vaccines are important. I also think that this issue is that there's no real explanation of what the end game here is. Like how long are we wearing masks for? What is going to be the deal with vaccine requirements?
Forever.
Hasn't felt like we've had a proper conversation about it.
I mean, we do all the time. And, the funny thing is 15 days to slow the spread has quickly turned into nearly 2 years of harsh restrictions, mandates, requirements. And there's one prediction right now that what's going to happen is there will be a wave of fake vaccine cards. We've already seen some stories. And then all of a sudden you're going to hear in the media, people want digital passports, and they've already started making them. And then what really happens is a social credit system. So they track more than just your vaccine. Like one of the reasons I'm very much opposed to this is they're trying to use something that most people find reasonable, like getting a vaccine. I've got a ton. I've traveled all over, so I just had to get all these cards. And when you go to Venezuela, you need one. And then they're going to use that as their in to get you to carry your passport. What are they doing in New York? You need your ID as well as your medical card. Well, for a lot of people, it's going to be easier just to download the app. What's the app going to do? The app's going to track you in many, many different ways. It's going to give the government access to data that only Facebook has, for instance, and shouldn't.
Yeah.
So that's...
Well, for me, this is a big loyalty test. Because a lot of officers who are skeptical of the federal government, who want bodily autonomy, who think that they should have the right to decide what is right for them. There's a lot of people who are vaccinated, who are against the vaccine mandates, that are still not even talked about widely and publicly. But there's a big sector of these individuals out there. So, we had a guest on a couple of days ago that said it's very easy to fake a lot of this compliance, a lot of these passports. And the people who are standing up, the people who are vocal, are deciding to do it on principles, or deciding to do it on morale. And that's why seeing a lot of these officers being purged, a lot of these officers being fired, only will help, I believe, the federal government in the long run, because they'll have more compliant officers that will always do what they want them to do no matter what the consequences are. And you always start with something little and you keep escalating it. That's why we started with, just 2 weeks, just stay home, and then masks, and then vaccines, and then second vaccines, and then passport systems, and now booster shots. And then it's only going to get worse from here unless the American people stand up and say enough is enough. We're not going along with this. And that's why I think this Southwest story is so big. It deserves a lot more mentions. And someone in the comment section wrote that Southwest decided to do this because of the weather conditions, which I thought was absolutely hilarious, because that was their initial line. Jen Psaki said that nothing existed, that this wasn't a protest, nothing was happening here. Well, obviously it was, because why did Southwest change their major decision here? So these are going to have far-reaching implications, not just with the police, not just in the corporate world, but this is, I think, deliberately done as a loyalty test to see who's going to obey government the most.
Mm-hmm. And so your vision is basically we should just, basically have no vaccine requirements, no vaccine mandates, no mask requirements, and just make it like the flu shot. In other words, if you want to get the flu shot, you get the flu shot Same thing with coronavirus.
Yeah, I certainly think so. We had a really interesting conversation. Ian asked about the morality of mandates. Like, what if you had Ebola? There's a good question. And I'm like, it is tough. I think with like an airborne Ebola with like a massively high infectivity, and you like it would self-regulate in a lot of ways. But ultimately, regardless of whether or not it does, I think even if that is the case, we shouldn't have mandates. It should self-regulate. People should say, I'm concerned about this. I will protect myself. But now all of a sudden we're getting just the argument changes every single time it comes out, right? First, Fauci has gone back and forth on masks, I think 2 or 3 times. He went back and forth on double masking a couple times. Then the CDC said, wear double masks. And I think a lot of people at this point are just like, when you get a Fauci coming out who can't give you a straight answer, but he keeps being touted and championed, eventually people just say, enough. One of the biggest issues with the mandates is it's forcing people to disclose medical conditions. It's forcing people to disclose private personal details. And if you're concerned about it, you need to assume the risks of your life to go out and live and work. From the beginning, one of the problems we've seen with COVID is that we've decided to do a one-size-fits-all approach to literally everything. Hey, the people above 40 are the highest risk factor, so let's lock down everything, including schools. And now we're in a major economic crisis, which is only being exacerbated by ridiculous Joe Biden policies and ignorance and Pete Buttigieg being on vacation. So they're really good at making things worse. Maybe we should have had a surgical approach where we said, okay, if you're in a vulnerable population, we'll do special accommodations. We'll do what we can to have skeleton crews keeping the economy running so we don't just shut everything down. But we went one size fits all. Now we're doing the same thing. And you'll have people who have very deep religious or moral convictions as to why they're not interested in this, notably the use of fetal cells in the experimentation process for the Pfizer vaccine. And Johnson & Johnson uses fetal cells for the growth of the virus to produce it. I can certainly understand why a lot of people are like, you cannot force me to take something like that. And then you have medical conditions in which already in New York, there's no exceptions for medical conditions. And many of these businesses are saying, oh, your doctor said no? We reject that logic. And so I'm seeing stories of, we had this woman, I believe it was from ESPN, who said that she's trying to have a baby with her husband. And for that, she's been recommended not to get I believe that's what it is. Well, she says she's not going to be getting the vaccine. And they said, we don't care whether you want to have a kid or not. There have been a few stories of women who have said their doctors advise them not to get the vaccine while they're currently or about to, try and have a kid, even though I think the FDA said it's safe for women who are pregnant. Their doctors still gave them personal advice based on maybe their blood pressure. And now because of the FDA, because of the establishment, these women are being told, choose to have a kid or quit your job. Like this whole thing is completely broken. That's why I'm like, it's bad across the board.
And where do you stand? What about things like measles vaccines that are mandated for kids before coronavirus, obviously, this was going on, or polio? What about those vaccines?
Yeah, so those are particularly different, but there's an interesting overlap. I would oppose, in some respects, vaccine mandates in that area. However, we're talking about vaccines that have been tested for decades. For some of the production of some of these is 20, 30 years, and these mandates were all implemented through long legislative processes, as opposed to the mayor said do it or else. Yeah. The president says do it or else, and now people who are trying to get legitimate exemptions are being told no. And now the interesting thing that this is all starting. This is why, again, man, talk about bad policy from Democrats by mandating this. The COVID vaccine, which is just entering now the long-term trials, according to the FDA insert for the community vaccine. You have people now looking into MMR vaccines and the other standard vaccines, and they're discovering that not only do we use fetal cells in the production of the viruses from aborted babies, we're learning that they use that for like ibuprofen and stuff. So now you're getting people actually starting to challenge past vaccine mandates, which most of us didn't have a problem with because we were like long-standing research, legislative process, legislative approach. Okay, some of us don't like that it's happening, but we agree we went through that process. Now you have Bill de Blasio being like, do it or else with no exemptions. And so you get people who have underlying medical conditions being denied access to restaurants. You have people who are just concerned about trusting the government, namely a lot of people in the black community. Billy Prempe made a great video talking about why the black community is untrusting of this. They're being told they can't go into these businesses. And now because of the politics of it, you actually have Republicans saying, maybe we should look into all of the mandates. And I'm like, oh, geez.
Yeah. I mean, they've been lying through their teeth about so many of these issues. They've been flip-flopping. They've been inconsistent. They've been censoring scientists. They've been censoring studies. They've been censoring actual real debate that we never had about this. Fauci only does softball interviews where they, a family-friendly show, pleasure him with words in many different possible ways that I never thought was even possible. So when we're not even having a real conversation, when we're told 100% safe and effective, and then we're finding out, 3% after a few months, and a lot of the data that's still coming that we don't know, it brings up a lot more questions than answers. But to kind of put the question back onto you that you asked Tim, how would you approach everything?
Well, yeah, I mean, here's the thing, guys. I'm not a great person to ask about this because as soon as COVID hit, I decided to work on this book, and that was like, I'm flat out on this book. It was drugs, crime, homelessness for the last several hundred years. All I would say is I think it was interesting because, of course, we have two mental models of vaccines. One is, as a parent, I've got two kids, both have been through school already, but, you have to get vaccines to go to public schools. But then you have a flu vaccine. Every year we get the shot for the flu vaccine. That's not mandated. So we have two different models. So it's kind of like, is coronavirus like polio and measles, or is it like a flu? Obviously, it's probably somewhere in between.
Yeah, that's interesting. Long COVID is interesting because you've got these lingering health effects, and that's why they're saying, okay, maybe people should get this. I don't think, I'll put it this way. While COVID is very obviously serious and dangerous, somewhere in between, I think is a good way to put it. I look at the data and I'm just like, I don't see this as being on that level of mandating vaccines for this. But more importantly, you can choose not to put your kid in these schools. You can go to private schools. You can go other places. You can homeschool. To say you can't go to a restaurant or hold a job is where we're starting to get very serious. Because right now, this is really where the big dividing line is. You could go and get a job anywhere, and they're not going to demand your medical papers. They'll ask for your government papers, which already is, pretty interesting, I think, and there should be an argument about that. But now we're getting to the point where it's, if you want to get a job, you have to undergo a state-mandated medical procedure. And that's where I'm like, yeah, I'm not a big fan of that. It's one thing to be like, this is a school. You don't have to put your kid in this school. You can find other ways to educate your kid. Now they're saying, well, if you've got Joe Biden doing federal mandates, if you've got New York City doing citywide mandates, that's passing just, business mandates. Now, as for private businesses, there's an interesting argument here. And I think non-discrimination is where it becomes, there's a question about whether or not a business like Southwest could do this. So does a business have a right to discriminate on the basis of medical or religious practices? And the answer is no, overwhelmingly no. I know that conservatives used to be on the other side of this to a great degree, like, the famous story of the baker. Yeah. The argument was the baker was told he had to write a message he didn't want to write. And they said he ended up winning on free speech grounds, I guess, but they still harass him, the left does. So I've always been on the side of, if you're using public spaces funded by the public, you have a right to serve the public and provide public accommodation to everyone. You can't make up arbitrary reasons to discriminate. If someone comes in screaming or threatening people, yeah, by all means, kick them out. If someone's got a disability, I don't think you should be able to say no. However, what are we seeing with a lot of these companies? They don't care about what your doctor said. What are we seeing in New York? In New York, I called a couple dozen restaurants who outright told me they did not care if you had a disability barring vaccination, like maybe you have Guillain-Barré syndrome, like the drummer from The Offspring. He got kicked out of the band because he could not get the vaccine due to Guillain-Barré syndrome. So this is where people have just straight up been like, we have now violated the Americans with Disabilities Act. We don't care, and no one will enforce it. Not a fan.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you have these two extremes between Australia and Sweden, that have been sort of out there as these two visible mental models. And I mean, what I totally agree with is the idea that Americans we're really bad at, this is one of the points I make in San Fran-sicko, we're just bad at the gray areas and a more surgical approach to these things. It tends to be an on or off switch for us.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that assessment, because from the very beginning, there was so much fear mongering, there was so much drama, there was so much emotional manipulation that literally people shut down, and Democratic politicians and also other politicians said, close down those small mom and pop businesses. Police officers ran around, shut down those businesses. Meanwhile, the big multinational corporations were allowed to be open the whole time. Yep. And I think, to add to your point, that's why there was also also a sentiment against the police officers that was very negative on the right because of that. And they didn't get a lot of support when Black Lives Matter kicked up during that summer, because everyone's like, these are the same guys that kicked down my door and shut down my business while allowing Walmart and Costco to do whatever they wanted to. So where does this end? It doesn't. There's too many billionaires benefiting from it. It's going to proceed to lead to a situation that we're seeing in Australia, that we're seeing in Italy. There's a viral video that I played in my YouTube video today of an old grandma outside of a hospital, and a security guard is kicking her out. And he's like, he wants the vax mandate. She didn't have her right paperwork. She needed treatment at the hospital. She couldn't get it. She was told to go away, and this poor elderly grandmother walked away. Yeah, because she didn't have the paperwork.
But she was vaccinated?
I have no idea about that. But these are the vaccine mandates. You don't have your paperwork, you can't get food. You can't get services that are basic human rights services that shouldn't be denied to anyone. And this is going to lead to an Australian, Italian-like situation.
Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to watch live, you can check out this channel Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. And don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, and if you want more unfiltered and uncensored content with all of these guests, go to timcast.com and become a member. All of these guests you know and love in exclusive segments on our website where we are unrestricted in what we talk about, so you'll definitely not want to miss it. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you all next time.